Hi, Mandy.
Hello.
Welcome to Sylvan Healing's podcast, where we're looking at the healer, the how, and the why. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. I can't wait to find out more. I've written a few notes, and obviously at the beginning you've answered a few questions that I had, so that I've got some idea of what you do and how you do it. So we've got some of the how and the why, and we'll expand on that for the people listening at home. So first of all, Mandy, if you could just let us know who you are, where you're from, and what you do, little introduction before we start the conversation.
Yeah, fine. This gets longer the older I get, of course. But so my name's Mandy Spray. I'm currently living in North London, northwest London. I'm from Devon originally, from East Devon, a small Devon village, and that might come up more in the conversation. I've been living here for about 30 years. I'm now a life coach after a kind of working journey that's included nursing, homeopathy, and working for social services and social care. Lots of different things that have all led me to where I am right now, who I am today. But my working life now is as a life coach. I also run a small social enterprise with a friend and colleague that's also about sharing the information that we have about energy and about healing. So I've got two children, both in their 20s. No, that's not true. One's just 30, a cat and a tortoise. And I work from home.
That's your additional pets, not your children, right?
That's right. And then I run retreats. I do one-to-ones. I also do group programs and run retreats from time to time around life coaching and helping people make sense of life. That's my kind of strapline. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you. So tell us about your past that will help us understand what you're doing today.
Well, I've always been curious about people and wanting to hear their stories from a really early age. Apparently, I was quite annoying because I would ask kind of inappropriate questions or that seemed inappropriate. So I've always wanted to make sense of why are people like that? Why are they shouting? Why are they crying? Those kind of questions started really early. As I said, I was brought up in a small Devon village, a farming community. So nature and being out in nature was very much part of my early childhood. Healing and natural healing was part of my upbringing. I don't even remember noticing that. It was just part of the water we swam in, if that makes sense. So this was in the 60s. Local GP was very much about natural medicine. He didn't really like vaccinating kids. I mean, that was my kind of norm that I was brought up in. I went into nursing, the main reason being that I wanted to live in London. And in those days, you got free accommodation and a wage. So I moved to London when I was 18 and trained as a nurse. And still my why questions weren't being answered satisfactorily for me. It was all about treating rather than finding out why. So then I trained as a homeopath. I trained in Reiki and EFT and various other things. And then came across life coaching about 10 years ago. And that suddenly became I suppose, the holy grail for me, really. It worked for me because there's lots of talking, there's lots of listening, and there's lots of pointing people back to who I think they truly are, which is this miraculous being that believes there's something else, and that's getting in the way of things. So that's kind of a short story, but everything's influenced. Having children has influenced me. The relationships that I've had have influenced me. My dad had a stroke before I was born, so had a disability. That was very influential as well. And looking back, and I do like to do this, looking back at my timeline, I can see where all the influences have led to me doing what I'm doing today and being who I am today. Yeah.
Fabulous. So what are your memories of your grandmother then? Healing, because not a lot of people have that in their history.
No, and it was so normal that I didn't even think about it until probably a couple of years ago. But my grandmother, she gave off a healing energy. So she was a lovely person to be around. Her and my grandfather ran a village bakery in a nearby village. And she just had this aura about her. Nobody saw her as a healer necessarily, but you felt better for being with grandma. What she used to do, there was a visiting healer that used to go around the local churches. And she used to go to him for hands-on healing. And I can remember when I was about 18, going with her. She was quite frail then and was having difficulty walking. And I can remember helping her into the church. This guy did the hands-on healing, and then she almost kind of trotted out and was a completely different person. And I can remember being kind of a bit blown away by that. So that was grandma. She believed in healing. I think more importantly, she had this healing energy about her. She was very calm. She was very loving. She just had this belief, I think, that everything was okay.
Yeah.
That we were okay, whatever our troubles were. She didn't focus on our troubles. I can remember that. If I went to see her because my brothers and my boy cousins were picking on me, she'd offer me some clotted cream. It wasn't a case of sit down and talk about it. So I think there was a kind of healing energy. And the village had that as well. On some of the farms, they were just good places to be. And although I didn't necessarily realize at the time why, I think you're naturally drawn towards something that has a healthy energy around it. And that's what I found.
It's really interesting that you said that, because that seems to be a common theme with people who understand about energy, is that it comes from nature. That whenever they go to nature or they've grown up in a situation where they've been in natural environments like farms or small villages in the countryside, they've almost, like you've said, been unaware but aware at the same time of there being something other that they, until you experience the contrast and maybe go to a city or something and realize that there's something that feels completely different, maybe didn't even realize was a thing.
Absolutely. And I think also realizing that we're all part of nature as well, that there's the natural part of me, which is always in connection. It's not, I've realized more and more, it's not necessarily going to find this peace of mind or going to find this sort of sense of nature. It's actually knowing that I am that. And knowing that everybody is that, and creating, I see my job as a coach of kind of creating an environment where we can hang out in that natural space and see what natural healing comes up for people in the moment.
I like that position of understanding that you are natural already, because it feels like in modern times we're always seeking externally for something else that's going to make it okay and make us all right, when we already are all right.
Completely. And that's my job now, is helping people understand, well, we call it the inside out understanding, that it's always coming from inside. And I think what kind of blew me away about 10 years ago was coming across a teacher who's passed away, but hearing what he was saying, which was that nobody's broken, none of us are broken. And I've kind of known that as an intellectual understanding for a long time, but actually hearing it from a completely different place and feeling and having a sense of the truth in that is what changed my world from, I suppose, healing into life coaching, into coaching people. So helping people to make sense of that. So that understanding that nobody's broken. And I've worked for many years, I've worked with people with learning disabilities and their families. So that was a big thing for me anyway. But I really heard it on a different level. Actually, this is different to what I'd understood. None of us are broken. We all have that diamond within. We're all in connection with spirit, with nature, with whatever. And we're living from that place, but we're not necessarily experiencing it because of all the beliefs and core beliefs and stories that we've kind of believed over the years, which have resulted in us looking outside of ourselves more. As you say, looking for the answers, whether that's, I don't know, medicine, TV. We're looking for healers, often forgetting that we are the healers. And our healing will lead us to other healers. So I have healing from Sylvan regularly. Sometimes it occurs to me, oh, just book an appointment for some healing. Yeah. Another time I might go to a homeopath. Another time I might go for a walk. But the important bit for me is tuning in. What do I need now? What does my soul need now? And then the answers come up. So it's sometimes daring to ask, guide, spirit, whatever. I'm probably going off on tangents here, but
no, that's really interesting, because one of the things that I was going to ask you about was the I would want to say juxtaposition, that might not be the right word, between the medical model and the what people call woo-woo, and how it comes back, and I said this in the last interview, to one of the things I'm fascinated in is how science has proven the placebo effect, which is something that I think is similar, in that it's affected us in an untangible way and yet works. And I think that is an explanation that people who might be cynical or in the medical model might be more comfortable with, in that they just go, well, it's just the placebo effect. Because I've always been open-minded enough to think that even if it's something I might not necessarily understand or believe in or have found to be scientifically proven, does it really matter if it helps? If it works for you, does it matter how? And so I guess I just wanted your opinion on that, because you have formal training as a nurse, and you have this background knowledge of your grandmother having that energy healing and having energy healing herself. So I wonder if you experienced anything similar in your past.
Sure. And it's funny, one of the things that I found really helpful is to be okay with not knowing the answers to things. And that, having been brought up to think we always should know the answer, and often pretending that we know the answer, the relief in saying sometimes, like, do you know what, I'm not really sure, I don't really know the answer to that, is really helpful, I think. And it gives us enough space to stop for a while and think about what's making sense to me right now. So sometimes the medical model can make sense. Now, I think it comes from the kind of wrong end, in that there's something broken that needs fixing. And that kind of makes sense. If you've broken your leg, it needs fixing. And I would definitely want an orthopedic surgeon or somebody to help me with that. So I think, again, it's tuning in, tapping into what do I need right now? What's available to me right now? The idea of fixing something can be really confusing. And it's like being clear sometimes about, what do you think needs fixing? If I think that my way of being in the world needs fixing, it doesn't. It absolutely doesn't. If I think that your way of being in the world needs fixing, it absolutely doesn't. So I think the medical model has got a bit tied up with something being broken. And that includes emotions and feelings and sensations, as well as the physical body. I think sometimes I think we're getting better at seeing if somebody's got, I don't know, an issue with their gallbladder. Let's look at what's behind that, what's causing the problem with that, rather than rushing in and fixing it. Because if we don't look at the whole picture, the holistic picture, is that they're gonna have problems somewhere else. It's gonna come out somewhere else. So I think sometimes there is the need to go in and fix, but if we can also do that, and at the same time be looking at it more holistically, what's created this problem in the first place? Not you've created it, because I think particularly in the kind of mind, body, spirit world, sometimes people can feel or be led to feel that they've created their problems. And that's not what I talk about at all. I think we are creating every minute of every day. We are creators in co-creation with the universe, with God, whatever we want to call it. And we kind of create our experience of things, but I don't see that we necessarily create the circumstances. So, and I also think everything comes from the formless, everything comes from the universe. So the medical model, the spiritual model, whatever, that they're all kind of coming from the same place.
Mm.
And a lot of people are doing the best that they can with the information they have. In fact, most people are doing the best that they can with the information they have.
Yeah.
So it's not a case of blaming and saying you're getting it wrong. I'm more interested in, why do you think that's the best way? So with clients, sometimes it's like they'll be shooting off on a particular path, and then I'm saying that might be the right path, but let's look at why it's looking like the right path at the moment, whether that's addictions, whether that's going for surgery, whatever it is. It's like, let's take a little pause and see why that makes sense to you at the moment. And very often people's paths will shift because of that, because of spending time to ask the why, what's behind that. And often behind that is, well, I'm not good enough or clever enough to make my own decisions. So that in itself is enough to start a conversation. And those often are the kind of conversations that I have. I work with a lot of young people, sort of in their teens, 20s, who are very confused about who they are. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And there was a few things running through my mind as you was talking. One of them was, I'm going to ask you shortly about a particular individual that you already gave me some information on before we met. But as you were talking, you went almost down the same line that I was thinking in, which is that our current inability to be open to the possibility of other things and allow those to help us as well in understanding ourselves could be one of the drivers in modern life that's causing what's termed as the mental health crises that we're seeing today, particularly with our young people. So my son has chronic tic disorder, and we were a part of a Tourette's support group, and I knew the lady that ran it. And during the pandemic, when we were all on lockdown, a support line that got, I think, 500 calls a month was getting 2,000 or 3,000 a day all of a sudden, with parents saying that their children had developed tics or tic-like behaviour. And does that mean that they have Tourette's now? And I'm going on a tangent, but I'm just realising that what's always been considered a physiological miswiring in the brain, and I think there is an element of that can also be triggered or created from emotional distress and uncertainty and fear. And I was interested in your point of view on how our energies, because it's not all positive, we can have negative energies too, how our energies or the energetic balance can change our physiology.
Yeah. Oh, great.
Yeah,
lovely. Yeah. And I mean, for the last 10 years, I've been teaching from something called the Three Principles. So there was a man called Sydney Banks, and he talks about the three principles, which is mind, thought, and consciousness. Now, I'm not going to go into details about that, except to say that what he's saying is that we're living in a thought-created reality. Yeah. That's different from trying to think positively. Now, I'm also really interested in the work of Abraham Hicks and Law of Attraction, where what they're pointing to is that we're living in a vibrationally created reality. So I'm really interested in what vibration are we in at any moment in time, and what thoughts live in that particular vibration. So if I'm feeling a bit nervy, which started a few seconds ago when I started talking about the three principles, and it's like, so my mind is going, am I going to get this right? My mouth's a little bit dry. So I'm in a thought created reality because I was thinking about, am I going to do this properly? Yeah. So as I notice that my feeling state shifts, that's usually enough for it to settle again. It's like, okay, I'm going into nervy land. With a lot of the young people that I work with, we talk about video games, and it's like, what video world have I moved into right now? So I know that if I'm in a nervy vibrational state caused by nervy thinking, I might get this wrong, I will have a physiological response to that, which is probably increased adrenaline, increased cortisol. If I stay in that state for long enough, I'm going to have health issues. Now, for me, my gut can get a bit sensitive. My joints can get a bit sore. They're really useful information for me to realize that actually I've been living in a bit of a nervy world for the last few days without even realizing it necessarily. So the symptoms that I experience, physical symptoms, are really good information to say, who am I being right now?
Yeah.
Am I being Mandy, who's kind of chilled and calm, or am I being Mandy who's a bit scared of what's going on in the world? Is my attention being drawn to scary stuff in the world? And that is one of my things. I will get drawn to that because I'm trying to make sense of it. When I get drawn to that, and I'm not saying never look at that, but when I'm drawn to looking at that and being interested in that, my body will have a physiological reaction to it. And realizing that is really, really helpful. But it's not saying to people, change your thinking. It's actually helping people to get in touch with their feelings and what kind of vibrational state they're in. Does that answer what you were saying?
Yeah, it does actually, probably better than I could have put it. So when I talk to clients, because I'm a coach as well, but I do a different style of coaching. And one of the things that I talk about is how I talk about it in terms of our subconscious and our conscious. They don't always communicate very well. They're kind of like siblings that sometimes get moody with each other and slam doors and don't talk. And that our body and our, if we're really curious about our thoughts that are not here, I can almost feel them in my body, the thinking that comes from here, but that comes from here instead. If I get this bit to be quiet for a while, and meditation helps me for that, and I start listening to the quiet, subtle messages underneath and the whispers my body is making, they've got, for me, more truth in them than the constant, what the Buddhists call monkey mind, that tends to be what most people hear because it's the loudest. So that kind of reminded me of that in a way.
Absolutely. And I think the brain is an amazing tool. So that, it's a classic example. If we put our hand on a hot stove, the brain remembers that's not a good idea because it was painful and it will stop us doing that again. I had an experience a few years ago where I was in my car and a bin lorry reversed into my car. I wasn't hurt. The car was very slightly damaged. But my brain started trying to tell me that bin lorries were dangerous, that Fridays were dangerous to go out because that was bin lorry day. And I could see how if I continued on that trajectory, I would probably end up not leaving the house. And it's very subtle, and the brain's doing exactly what it's designed to do, which is keep us safe.
Yeah.
But actually what it often does is it gets confused and it over amplifies or over eggs the information. And what we need to do more is trust our body, trust our feeling state, because we've got all these amazing senses. And when I started thinking about the bin lorry issue, it was like, okay, if I can get under the thought, the scary thought, what's there? And it's like, you're completely safe. And under the scary thought lives common sense and wisdom. Common sense that's common to all. But we often don't either hear that or trust that. We've all got it, but we're so living in a kind of brain. We see the brain as king, and it's really not. And I think science is catching up more with that now. I think we went through a period of not realizing how amazing we are and how we're designed with this incredible sort of senses, 6 senses, 7 senses. And I'm seeing, maybe it's just what I'm looking at, because obviously what we put our attention on grows. I'm seeing more evidence about people catching up with this. And maybe the kind of mental health crisis is having an effect on that by people asking more questions about why. Why am I like this?
Yeah.
Why am I experiencing this? And I think just to add to that, I'm finding particularly with the young people that I'm working with who are not really understanding that sadness is okay,
Mm.
that fear is okay. Sydney Banks said, if only we weren't frightened of our experience, the world would be a better place. But we're frightened of experiencing.
I call it the world. I don't know if I'll get in trouble for saying this publicly or not, but the best way I can coin it, and I do it in inverted commas, is that it's almost like everything's Disney. So you know, you do races in school sports day, but you never lose. You always win a prize, even if you come last. That everything's like the picture that's coming to mind is Snow White going through the woods with all the birds singing and all the lovely beautiful things, and all we ever want is this constant happiness, which doesn't exist.
Absolutely. And I think we need both. We need all
Balanced.
of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And all of it is part of the human experience. And if we cut out one bit, then we're cutting out the other bits. And that's something that I certainly experienced. It's interesting. I was thinking about it the other day. Part of the thing with my dad having a stroke before I was born, mum was told not to let him get too excited. So I was born into a family that was scared of getting too excited because it could be dangerous. So we were constantly, you know, don't get too excited, don't get too noisy. And so it made sense to be sort of living on a kind of in a beige world, really.
It's like enforced stoicism.
Exactly. And it makes sense. So I've made sense of that. And this is not about blaming anyone. It made sense that that's what happened. But I realize also that we got that a bit wrong. And actually, excitement is fine. Feeling really unhappy and sad is fine. It's all part of the human experience. And not to be scared of that. So what I was talking about, some of the young people, if they feel their minds quietening, it's like, oh gosh, that's a bit scary. I don't really like that. That feels boring. That feels dull. That feels whatever. So let's find something else to do. And one of the things that I like to do is help people actually be okay with feeling that. Because I think, well, as we know in the work that we do, when we're in that quiet healing state, our body loves it. All the cells can be regenerating, all the healing's happening physiologically. So actually spending periods in kind of quiet mind, we can still be active, but we can be quiet minded, is so good for us. I meditate as well. I make sure now 20 minutes every morning I meditate. I also have been having internal family systems therapy. And a lot of my friends who are like, but it's all thought. It's like, no, therapy's great sometimes. I love it. And that's been really helpful to see the different parts of me that have developed. And we could call that the subconscious as well. There's different parts that have developed to keep me safe. Yeah. So don't go near that person because they don't look safe. You know, there's all sorts of things like that. I'd love to talk a bit about the subconscious as well, because this is a kind of new thing for me. I saw the iceberg, so the conscious mind, the subconscious mind. The new thing for me is to see, but then there's outside of that as well, which is universal mind. And there is no fixed edge to our subconscious. We can let universal mind, with its fresh new ideas and fresh thoughts, through. We want to be open to that flow. The subconscious I see it as our sort of library of events and experiences and beliefs and that sort of stuff that definitely affect our experience moment to moment. But when we understand that actually we're also living in a sea of universal mind, then that's just opens so many doors to possibility. I don't have to be stuck in this.
So how does that is that what the energy in energy healing is to you?
Yeah.
Or is it something different or something more?
It is that. It's, I suppose the way I work is it will depend on the individual. So it's meeting the person where they're at, you know, working out what they see is happening in their world, but always pointing them back to the fact that they are miraculous beings with this amazing opportunity to access universal wisdom at any time, but for our thinking that's stopping us. So we kind of look at resistance and why we do resist abundance, why we do resist all these amazing things that come into our lives. And it's helping people loosen the edges of who they believe they are, so that they can start living as who they really are rather than who they think they are. Yeah. So if we're walking around thinking that we're not very bright, then our experiences are going to reflect that. If we can walk around not worrying about whether people think we're bright or not, we'll have completely different experiences. Mm. So I love talking to people about how they're experiencing life, and then kind of picking away at that a little bit. Like, isn't that interesting that you think that? What I see is this amazing person in front of me, and yet you see that yourself is different. Let's look at that. And we have a lot of fun. I don't think the way I work, it's not all terribly serious, and we don't focus a lot on the issues as much as the why they're experiencing that.
Yeah, anxiety, a lot of the issues wouldn't exist if the experience wasn't there.
No.
So thinking about back to the young people that you work with, you gave me a particular story about a young man and an experience that he had with working with you. Would you like to tell us about that?
I've forgotten which one I spoke to you about, but
18-year-old with psychosis.
Oh gosh, yes, okay, yes. This was our wonderful young man. This young man was referred to me from his parents who were desperate. So he was 18.
It often happens, doesn't it? Energy healing is like the last ditch desperate resort when it probably would have helped much sooner.
Absolutely. And I love to work with the parents as well. And these parents were willing to have some sessions as well, which was really helpful. People aren't always, and that's fine. But this young man, yeah, he was not in a good way, really. He was very, very low, very depressed. He hadn't been out of the house for a long, long time. And his parents had taken him to doctors and things. And the latest advice was that he goes to a mental health facility. He was diagnosed with having psychotic episodes, being depressed, and various other things. There were a lot of labels, and he was prescribed medication. And the advice was that he goes to a facility because he was damaged and he was broken. And there wasn't any talk of healing. There wasn't any talk of going to the facility so that he could get better. Anyway, for whatever reason, the universe works in mysterious ways. His parents got in touch with me, and I had some sessions with him. And the first 2 or 3 sessions, he just cried. We were Zooming. He lives abroad. We were Zooming, having Zoom calls. And then one day he had a shower before he came on the call. The next time he had a few questions for me, and gradually, he came back to himself, because he completely lost himself. He didn't know who he was. He started to remember who he had been. So our conversations, well, they weren't really conversations at the beginning. They were me just telling him about stuff, not even focusing on the issue. It was like, it might even be stuff that I'd done, a movie I'd seen recently, or what my cat and tortoise were up to. But my aim was to get him to offer him this sort of loving energy that I could see was trapped in him, if that makes sense. He was so covered up with these beliefs about himself, with these ideas about himself, that he was broken. And
it's interesting that you say that, because that's one of the, when you work with anyone with highly traumatic experiences or PTSD, the first step, and you can't move on to the rest of the healing without the first step, is that the person is safe physically, mentally, that they feel in a safe place.
I think that's the most important bit. And it's a bit like, sometimes I say to people, like, if you want to change your diet, you don't, the best way is not just to strip out all the rubbish stuff, it's also to start putting in some really good stuff. And it's the same with any kind of sessions that I have with people. It's almost like flood them with loving kindness, with listening, with attention, with all of those sorts of things. Don't focus on what's going wrong. So this young man, I mean, cut a long story short, I think we worked together for maybe 6 months in all, and then he was suddenly too busy for his appointments because he was going out with friends and stuff, and it's like, brilliant. And
Wow.
I'd get a text like, I'm really sorry, I forgot that we had an appointment. It's like, please don't be sorry, this is perfect. And now he's traveling the world, he's got an amazing girlfriend, he's got the job of his dreams, because also that was part of the conversation. What would you love to be doing? He'd talk about what he didn't like, and it's like, what would you love to do?
Mm.
And he was saying things like, I'd love to work, for instance, on a huge super yacht. Ha 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 ha, isn't that funny? He's now working on a huge super yacht. So it's allowing people to be in that conversation with them. What would you love?
Mm.
And then why would you love it? How would you feel being on that super yacht, do you think? Because that's also fits in with the law of attraction, of course. If you're in that vibration, you're going to attract more of the same.
Mm.
So actually, why wouldn't we hang out in a place of excitement and anticipation and hope?
Mm.
So his whole 6 months was just talking. Yeah, just being in a talking situation. And his parents, this was a few years ago, I still get letters saying, thank you so much, you saved our lives, you saved his life. And you know, where that will filter, that's the bit that I love as well.
Mm.
So that was one person that I worked with. His friends are affected, his family are affected by that. Who knows who he's going to meet in his world? And he's got beautiful energy. He's showing up in this beautiful energy.
Mm.
That's just so healing for him and the world. So it's not about numbers. You know what it's like when you're in therapy. People say, how many clients have you got in your books at the moment? Well, probably millions if you think of one person and how that's going to filter.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was him. I had a client last week who said to me, bless her, she's 18, 19 now, and she said, I've just realized that I've written a script about a really miserable, unhappy woman, and I'm playing the main part.
Mm.
Yeah, you wrote the script, sweetheart. That's innocently.
That's
It made
interesting
sense.
because that's a word that's used in my style of coaching that I trained. So I've trained on transactional analysis and life scripts. Um,
Right.
and there was something else as well that I did that something you said reminded me of when you was talking about how we've learned to be who we are, and that it's not that we are that and I had a similar thing where somebody said to me, I can't even remember who it was now, but I've used it for my clients where the conversation was going, oh, I can't because or there was something, and it usually comes from childhood, something you've heard
Yeah.
an adult say that you've decided, oh, this is who I am now, and you've put on those binoculars, that's the lens through which you view the world. I am like there was one person who was dyslexic, so they for the rest of their lives thought they were thick. So
Yeah.
whenever they did anything, they came from a position of being thick,
Yeah.
because that's what a teacher had said to them once. You
Yeah.
know, you got to go
Yeah.
in slow class. You're a bit thick because you can't write properly.
That's right.
They actually had dyslexia, and we discovered that because this person was going, I can't do that, I'm not intelligent enough. And I asked, whose narrative is that?
Yeah.
Whose words are they? And he's
Yeah.
like, oh
Yeah.
God, that's teacher from when I was at primary school.
Yeah. I love it because it is like mind your language, isn't it? And I think that's where when you're in session with somebody, there's all these little flags pop up. You know, you notice, oh, I noticed you use that word.
Mm.
And that's where it can be useful to go back, see where it came from.
Mm.
And sometimes definitely we'll do that. And sometimes it's just like, well, actually, I can't really remember where it came from. But at some point you took on the belief that you were damaged, you were broken, you were stupid, whatever. It's another post-it note that you've innocently stuck on yourself, and now you're covered in post-it notes. And underneath that, behind that, is this amazing, miraculous being.
Mm.
And when we start to, it's not about peeling off the post-it notes so much as, well, in fact, it's not about peeling off the post-it notes. It's actually getting in touch with that miraculous being. And then the post-it notes just flutter away.
Mm.
But of course, they'll come back. I mean, if I could see what goes on in my mind during the day, I will see all sorts of, yeah, buts, what ifs, better not say that, shouldn't say that. So there's thought coming through all the time, these thoughts coming through all the time. And we do have a choice as to how much attention we give them or not. And sometimes we don't know that we've given them attention until we start feeling dreadful. It's like, God, I'm feeling really anxious at the moment. What's that about? It's like, oh, that I'm thinking anxious thinking again. It's just appeared. And then it's like, remember who you are, Mandy. You're this miraculous being. You're okay. You're safe. And sometimes I'll do some breathing exercises or something. It's not that there's no doing. Sometimes I do tapping. I trained in EFT. So a bit of tapping makes sense.
So for those that have never heard of it, what's that?
Sorry, EFT, emotional freedom technique. I mean, basically it's tapping various points on the body. The idea being that it releases whatever emotion it is that's keeping you trapped in that moment. And what I find now is that just a little bit of tapping on the side of the hand can be enough for my body to know it's safe. Yeah, so physically we're safe.
It's interesting that you mentioned EFT there, because it's most people that I speak to, they see energy and energy healing as being things like Reiki and spiritual church healing, you know, heal you, and the kind of extraordinary and extreme ends of it that you see on television and stuff like that, which is what makes people go, oh,
yeah,
you know, because a lot of them have been found out to be potentially scammers and things like that. And what I found really fascinating is that what you've been talking about has been is a lot more down to earth, rooted in real life, and doesn't feel like woo woo when you're talking about it. And so one of the questions that I was going to say was, because I know you've trained with Reiki and EFT, and from my understanding is that those points that you tap are meridian points, so they're energy lines that from Chinese medicine go through the body, and that's widely recognized, weirdly. So that's almost an energy medicine that's been accepted. And so I was just thinking about when you was talking just now about the post-it notes and our thought processes, subconscious, conscious, all of that. How do you connect that with, or how do you explain the connection, if there is one, with that way of talking and what people consider the woo-woo idea of energy healing?
Yeah. I mean, that's such a great question, because that's shifting for me all the time. I think right now in this moment, what makes sense to me is that this business of we're living in a thought created reality. Now, there is circumstance, definitely, but our experience of that circumstance will depend on our thought in that moment. Now, so often people think, well, how do I change my thought? And it's like, well, it's kind of not about that. It's about noticing the vibrational state you're in. And how we get into that healing state of oneness, of whatever it means, different things to different people. But for me, I know when I'm in this kind of healing frequency, when I say healing frequency, it's like a good place. It feels good. I feel good. When I'm in that place, I'm having better thinking. Yeah, I feel better about life. I'm going to be more open. Now, to get to that place, sometimes meditation works, sometimes a bit of tapping works, sometimes, as I said, having some healing works. Now, I don't know all the answers to how that happens. What I think what we want to focus on is the miraculous beings that we are. How we get there kind of doesn't matter. Some people get there through jogging. Now, if it's through harm, some people might feel that they're getting there from drinking a lot, for instance, or from taking other substances. To me, that's a different kind of high. I'm not talking about high necessarily. I'm talking about this good feeling where we feel that we're in connection. We feel lighthearted. We feel kind. We feel compassionate.
Is it that we feel balanced?
I think that's another word that can be used for that, definitely. And there's no tightness to it. We feel in flow. So we're kind of like, I don't know, just kind of wandering through the world, just noticing stuff. Simple. You used the word simple right at the beginning of the conversation. And that's really important. This is simple stuff. We have a thought, we feel it, we experience it. Yeah, this is kind of, the more we can point back to the simplicity of how we work and not complicate it. And I do it's really important to me that I make this simple and that I live in the real world. We are living as human beings in this world, and actually how we experience that. Now we can, I talk sometimes about spiritual bypassing, and what I would do in the past was I would spiritually bypass my experience by daydreaming, by creating another kind of internal world. And what I was doing, I was missing out on my experience of life. I wasn't facing stuff. I would avoid conversations and go into a romantic story in my head instead, if that makes sense. So it's balancing. It's being in the real world. It's sometimes imagining what we'd really love the world to look like. So it's not what we're doing. It's the place that it's coming from.
I'm
Where's that?
really interested in you saying spiritual bypassing, because my best friend is interested in that at the moment. He's reading a book about it. So interestingly, I already know a little bit about that from the conversations we've had. You've almost answered for me the question I was next going to ask you, and it was going to be I thought maybe a bit of an awkward question as well. So I think you're already going to have a good answer, which was, if it's okay to have bad feelings, then why bother trying to change them?
Yeah, we don't want to change them. We want to allow them to pass through, because there's often useful information in them. There could be a kind of cleansing. It's like when we start, if I start to believe that I'm intelligent, I lose the belief that I'm not intelligent. There's a loss in that. There's a grief in that. I'm losing a part of myself. So if we can see, like Sid Banks said, if we don't have to be frightened of our experiences. When he says experiences, he means our feelings. When we stop, we don't need to be frightened of our feelings. Life becomes so much easier. It's like, oh God, I'm feeling shit right now. Sorry, probably not supposed to swear. I'm feeling rubbish right now. I'm really depressed right now. And it's like, okay, can you just be okay with that? Can I love myself through that? Now, also, it's trusting the universe. Like, if before this conversation I was feeling really rubbish, I can trust that I'll show up in the way I'm meant to be in the moment. Does that make sense? So
I like the words you're using, which is right now and in the moment.
Oh, yeah.
Because what people don't understand or don't give enough energy to, I suppose, is that bit, is that it is just right now, that these things are always temporary, and that it will fluctuate.
Constantly.
Right now, it's in the moment, and the next moment or the next now could quite well be very different.
Absolutely. And I only realized last week, because I've always struggled a little bit with living in the now, because I saw that as quite static. And there's always new stuff, new insight available all the time. And it's suddenly like, oh, we're living from the now. And that gave it a whole different energy for me. I'll just tell you quickly, I worked with some social workers a few years ago, and one of them, who had a really good reputation, she introduced herself as Kat. So I assumed it was shortened for Catherine or something. The next time I saw her a few weeks ago, she reintroduced herself as Sophie. And I said, oh, I thought your name was Kat. And everyone laughed. And the reason they called her Kat was because she catastrophized about everything. So her whole weekends would be spent worrying about a meeting that she had on the Monday, for instance, thinking about what she should say, what she shouldn't say, what might happen. She was catastrophizing. When she understood this thought in the moment thing, all of that left her, and she could just show up in the moment knowing that she was really good at her job. So she got her weekends back, she got her husband back, she got all sorts of things back, because her weekends weren't taken up with worried thinking. So you're right, moment to moment to moment. Who am I being right now? Right now, I'm aware we've been here an hour. And then it's like, that's okay. Claire will sort that.
Brilliant. And I'm going to ask you one final thing, which is, if you could sum up vital force, who's never heard of it before, in one or two sentences, what would they be?
Vital force is, it's a homeopathic term actually, but it's got lots of other names as well. The way I see it is this energy that we all have within us that's also in everything else in the universe, and it's flowing through us and to us and from us all the time. And the more attention we give it and focus on this amazing gift, the more healing we'll feel our life experience.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. It's been lovely talking to you.
You too, Claire. Thank you.